Eddie Soldiers. So I'm a little sick. I think it's just a regular cold, so you get this sexy, raspy voice of mine for the intro here. You are welcome. I never realized how exhausting it is putting on my eyebrows until I had to do it when like slightly buzzed off of Benadryl. But all things considered, I think they came out pretty good. Fortuitously, I had planned to release this interview this week anyways, so it will give me a chance to rest and a chance for you to meet one of my good writer friends, Alex. Once again, I'm doing an intro to an interview I did because apparently when I decide to start interviewing someone, we just start talking and I don't like hit any of the base points to establish who this person is. A little while ago, I interviewed Alex, aka AJ Vrana, the author of the new adult supernatural thriller, The Hollow Gods. This follows three characters in the North BC town of Black Hollow, where the residents have a local folkloric tale of a mysterious figure called the Dreamwalker who abducts young women out into the forest. But then young women actually do start going missing and turning up dead, and there is this blur between what is folklore and what is real. It is full of small town secrets and morally gray characters and some really cool, creepy ass folklore that I think a lot of you would enjoy. Alex is also in the middle of writing a dissertation on supernatural fiction, and she has some amazing insights and opinions on the book community. So we talked about book consumerism, publishing, how social media is impacting the new adult market, and much, much more. So without further ado, I will leave you to our interview between me and author AJ Vrana.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today or tonight, whatever time zone you're in. Today's chat, I'm going to be talking with the author of the new adult duology, The Hollow Gods and the Echoed Realm, as well as writing her dissertation on speculative, I'm going to definitely say this wrong, hold on speculative supernatural fiction and its relation to modern violence. She's a lady doing a lot of things, and we're going to chat about publishing, book consumerism, new adult, all that good stuff. So, grab a drink, grab a snack, and buckle in. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit weird because I had a small dental procedure yesterday, and like the bottom half of this cheek is still a little bit numb. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on book consumerism, specifically on Booktok, but I feel like this could be relative to like booktube or just like book blogging in general, because like as you can see behind me, I am the shining example of books consumerism. So I feel like we have a lot to address on that particular topic.
I mean, I think it's like any social media space, and as an author, like I am very much embedded in that space as well, especially as someone in like the indie space. It is very much a part of like book culture.
I kind of said this before, but it goes back to that idea of like, oh, to be legitimate, you have to show off all of the physical things that you have. And I don't think that's true because, ebooks or audiobooks or what have you are fully valid ways to consume your books. And I just happen to like physical copies because that is something that like I have decided that I'm going to put value in.
Books are pricey, and I don't think that quantity of reading or quantity of book ownership is necessarily like reflective of how engaged you are in what you read. And I say this as someone who actually studies literature professionally. I have one little bookshelf there that's not even full. And then I have this bookshelf here that is full, but a lot of it is like academic text, 8+ years writing a dissertation on literature. And I don't own that many books. It's worth thinking about how we qualify being a good reader or being a dedicated reader, I guess. I feel weird constantly relating this to my academic life, but I mean, one of my dissertation chapters has like 50 citations maybe, but like probably more than that actually. There's no way that I could own every single one of those. Most of them are from the library. A lot of them are downloaded from like various databases, like scholarly databases. In some cases, they're borrowed from, colleagues and stuff. And that's fine. It always kills me when I see like people who buy books and then they're like, haha, my TBR is like 300 books long. And I'm like that's anxiety inducing for me. I don't know how people do that.
And my thing is that when people buy series that they've never read, or like they haven't even read the first one, they're like, I'm just gonna buy the whole thing because it's pretty. And I'm like, that's insane to me.
The thing that sticks out to me is that the ability to actually purchase books is such a class privilege. And I think that when we're talking about like inclusion in book spaces, that's a big thing that doesn't get talked about, is how people who are maybe lower income might not have access to tons of books or space to actually store books. Talking about that like material dynamic is really important, I think, especially when you go on like social media spaces and you see these people who have really beautiful, almost Disney libraries of just books that are all like color coded. It's gorgeous, but not everyone has the means for that.
Yeah, I like to set a book budget for myself, and even that, like I used to buy so many more, and so like I wasted so much money just because I was like, it's new and I have to buy it, and all the hardcovers are anywhere from like 22 to like 37 Canadian dollars. There's like one or two that I'm excited about that month, then like maybe I'll buy those. But you know, when there was like 7 or 8 that I was interested in, I'm like, I can't do that. You know, so I don't blame anyone for not going out and buying en masse.
And it is weird also because I'm an author, and so like I want people to buy my books, right? And so there's that weird conflict of interest where, you know, if I come out with like a new edition or something, I have to push it and I have to try and convince people to buy it. But at the same time, the human being in me recognizes that it's not like sustainable to, you know, just buy books endlessly.
I understand when you're on like a fast moving app like TikTok, or even on YouTube, it's like a bit slower, but definitely those like monthly hauls or what have you are like prime for like me adding 17 new books to my TBR pile.
Like I see those TikToks sometimes where like it's just people going to like bookstores and buying more books than they intended to buy, and I'm like, oh my god, like I would be so broke. How you fund this habit of yours? Like, are you robbing banks? Like, what are you doing?
And like, why? Is it just because someone like holds up something shiny and is like, you should buy this, and you're like, okay.
I do think we sometimes conflate buying books with loving literature, and that's maybe like a bit of a can of worms that might be uncomfortable, but like I think it is worth.
Well, let's open it, Alex. Let's just do it.
Like, at what point does the book just become like an object, right, that is consumed? When you purchase a book, are you buying something that's simply for your consumption, whether it's to take a photo of it or, you know, even to read it, or do you recognize that you're actually purchasing someone's labor? And that's something that not a lot of people think about when they think about buying books or even loving books.
I've seen on Instagram that Fairy Loot in particular is putting out more books that are like special edition with art and what have you. And to me that makes sense that those are, you know, $50 or more, because there's art in them, there's foiling, what have you. And then there's just publishers that are like adjusting the font a little bit and then putting out a new edition of something. And that, I'm like, that almost cheapens it to me. I mean, I guess it all depends on what you find value in and like how, if you want to support the publisher that way. But to me is like, I'd rather spend that money on like the art itself, if that's what I'm looking for. I'm not going to buy 7 editions of one book just because the cover is blue and now it's red. It's a weird like collector mentality that I definitely am trying to talk myself out of.
I don't remember where I saw this thread. Our beloved Sarah J. Maas and the ACOTAR covers, which have changed, like for the first book in the series, have changed. It's like Farah on the front with like the black dress, and then they sort of like changed the covers to something a little bit more like generic fantasy. And a lot of people were mad about that, and they were like, like, you know, my covers can't match now, and like that kind of a thing. And they sort of were like, the publisher's just trying to like get more money out of us by making us buy covers that match. And that was actually one instance where I was like, well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because the thing is that when ACOTAR first came out, it was marketed towards YA. And that cover was specifically intended to hit that sort of younger audience. But then when essentially the whole new adult thing started to happen, the publisher went, like maybe we should be selling this more as generic fantasy, like adult fantasy. And that was like one situation in which the publisher actually wasn't, at the beginning anyway, wasn't really trying to be like manipulative or like conniving. They were just trying to change their marketing tactics to hit a different audience.
Yeah, which I think is a very smart idea, just because I remember working in the bookstore when A Court of Mist and Fury came out, which is like the sexy one. And I remember seeing like 14-year-olds with it in their hands because they had read Throne of Glass and like, oh, it's by the same author, whatever, it's fairies. And I remember being like, oh girl, you are going to experience an awakening you are not ready for it. Like,
but what I thought was also interesting about that was how like mad people were that they couldn't have matching covers. Like that was the important thing. And I was like, well, isn't that itself like a sign of that sort of consumerist mentality of like, I need to have like matching books? Like I get it, but also to be that upset about it was interesting.
A lot of people get mad when they see my shelves because I don't care. I'll just buy them in like whatever format. And I'm like, if I get sent something from a publisher and it's a soft cover advanced copy, I'm not going to go out and rebuy it in a hardcover because like I don't have that kind of money. So the fact that my shelves are kind of mismatched, some people are really angry about it, and I find it really funny. I'm the fiend for the aesthetic, I fully admit. So I understand liking things to be uniform. It's not important to me, obviously.
And I mean, people do get mad for those kinds of reasons. They're like, oh, like now I can't take photos of them together. And I'm just like, okay, so then the book is just a prop because you like
there you go.
You want to take a photo of it. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, at what point does the book just become an object? And I'm like, so do you love literature, or do you just love like the social capital that comes with having this object that accrues like value in a particular community?
I don't necessarily think that it's mutually exclusive to like want something as like a prop, but then also buying it because you really love it. Like I do think that's a Venn diagram, but I absolutely understand the idea of like, oh, well, everyone else has it, so I need to have it. That is where conscientious consumerism comes in.
You can love a story and love a book and like engage with the work and also appreciate its like physical beauty and use it to like grow your social media presence or whatever. And it's important to like say that as well, because it's not just about like, I don't know, crapping on people who have a bookstagram. I have a bookstagram, like, so it is just sort of being conscientious about those things because they do also impact authors. We rely on our readers and we really like need people to read our work, but there is a lot of pressure sometimes to just give your stuff away for free. There has been, I guess, like a very slow gradual devaluing of the actual labor that goes into producing a book. So like we give away lots of books for like e-arcs and things like that, and that's totally fine. Like that's just sort of part of the game, but there does come a point where people kind of expect it for free. And that can get like a little dicey sometimes.
A lot of people see book bloggers getting things for free, and like, yes, I absolutely have gotten a lot of things for free. A good portion of my like why my bookshelves are so big is because I'm part of a lot of the copy programs that will send me things. And so when people see that, I think they start to think that, oh, it's nothing. Like people are just getting these, like it's totally fine. Like, oh, why are books so expensive? I'm like, okay, because you think that somebody just goes, I have a story idea. It's about this prince and this princess and they live happily ever after. And then I phone up an agent and I say, hi, I'd like to sell my book. And they go, okay, here's an advance of $20,000, and then it just arrives in the store the next week. Like there's so many steps and like people to pay. When I worked at the bookstore, people used to say, oh, well, how come it's cheaper online? And I'm like, well, because a portion of that cost is basically to rent space on the shelf because the bookstore needs to make money too.
It's very complicated. And, the other reason why books are cheaper on Amazon is because Amazon can wrangle massive discounts out of distributors. Mm-hmm. So bookstores get a standard like 40% discount on purchases of books, whereas Amazon gets like a 60% discount. And they get that discount because they can, because they're Amazon. So, the reason the book is cheaper is because Amazon's getting it for cheaper. Authors don't make that much money off books. Like that's another thing people don't always realize is that like, unless you are the 1% of authors who are getting those 6-figure advances, like the average yearly income of your average author is like $10,000. It's not very much.
The way that advances are broken down is usually in, I think, 3 or 4 kind of like lump sums. Maybe, they got a good regular middle class salary's worth of an advance, but they're going to get that over the next 3 years. You get a portion of that lump sum once the book is published, and then again once it's in paperback. So that is like years apart. Exactly. So unless you're selling like 4 or 5 books a year at that price, like you're not going to be like throwing money around all glamorous unless you happen to be one of those very lucky authors who hits the market right with the right book at the right time with the right agent.
Or sometimes there are massive delays because if it's, say, a foreign rights deal, you actually have to do a lot of paperwork to avoid getting taxed twice. So I recently had a translation deal go through, and yes, very exciting. And so normally that advance would be taxed at 30% in Canada, which is massive. But if it was taxed locally in the country where the translation was sold, it's 10%. But I have to do a lot of paperwork with the government of Canada to be taxed at the like foreign country's rate rather than the Canadian rate. And so that there is just like a 3-month delay off the bat.
So one of the reasons that we originally started talking about new adult is because your book, The Hollow Gods, is a new adult book, and it often gets miscategorized, and people are kind of not angry, but like disappointed in it because there's not heavy romance or heavy smut. So what would you like to say to that?
Well, so actually when my agent pitches my book somewhere or writes about it, they actually just classified as adults. As you mentioned, they do get misclassified as YA quite frequently because people think that new adult has to have like a lot of smut. There's a romance subplot in my book, but there's no like heavy romance. And the reason why I find this really frustrating is because usually the people who misclassify it as young adult will also say things like, it was confusing. One of the major differences between adult fiction and young adult fiction is how narratives are delivered. So with adult fiction, you have a lot more metaphor, you have a lot of like subtlety, you have stuff that is left unsaid and it's kind of up to the reader to figure it out. Whereas like young adult, it delivers the message much more directly. And so that's what I mean by it has like a specific formula that it follows.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that is your expectation for all fiction, yeah, you're going to be confused. The irony is that people want it to be young adult because there aren't things like sex or heavy romance. And they kind of end up ignoring the other things about the book that actually do demand like maturity or what have you, like, you know, things like mental health or grief in a more complicated way, like your adult identity, a much heavier kind of like reckoning with, and that kind of stuff just gets sort of swept under the rug because people are looking for these very specific check boxes.
I think especially now that like new adult, younger and younger people are finding it, but like they don't quite have the grasp of an adult's perspective to look on it that way. And that I think is where the dissonance comes in with the audience and the content. A lot of the first books that were categorized as new adult are romance books. How does that expectation like impact either like sales of your book or like how people interact with it?
There's a lot of people who read the book purely for the romantic subplot. Kai, the male love interest, is sort of the most popular character, and like that I'm very flattered, and like I love seeing people kind of like gush about him. It makes me happy. Some of the stuff that I will notice that is maybe not as positive is like people will be applying romance tropes or like expectations of like a romance structure to the book. A comment I see sometimes is like, oh, it's like insta love. There isn't like a load of tension before they start to develop like a kind of romantic relationship. But in a book that is primarily meant to be like a supernatural thriller, the relationship is following probably more what would be like a real life relationship where two people meet, they're attracted to each other, and they have like some really, really intense and dangerous experiences together. And then they maybe like have sex or make out or something. Like that's a little bit more in line with what we might expect in reality than what we might expect in like a romance genre book.
That's also another dynamic that like you don't see a lot in books because you're expected to have the pining and the will they won't they for so much of the book, where it's sometimes people meet each other and are like, hey, I'm attracted to you, me too, cool, and then like that happens right away, but then like also, you know, the world's on fire, or like also there's a supernatural threat and like we're gonna face it and we happen to be together. I think that is something to explore that publishing hasn't really done. There's different ways that people will enter into romantic relationships or enter into sexual ones, and it's not always the like rose petals on the bed. Not that that can't happen or that people can't enjoy reading that or engaging with that kind of media, but I think it is nice to have those different kinds of experiences because that's what a lot of people are going to go through, or like the awkward things, or maybe you have your first kiss with somebody and you didn't really like it, but then later you have a kiss with somebody that you do really like, and like that kind of variation is way more natural.
Yeah, I mean, my first kiss was terrible. It was like
same,
you know,
like
I don't even remember
it's
it.
so weird, but it would be maybe beneficial to other people to see that it's not just a romance thing, because you
Yeah.
can have books that have 20-something-year-old characters in them making bad decisions and like figuring their life out, that are not always romance based. And I think that would maybe like endear more people to it, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, that just means that it's about sex.
I think the expectation of romance is a problem because, yeah, like what if you have an author who's like super, super duper ace and they don't want to write romance, but they want to talk about like other stuff that a person in their early 20s goes through.
That actually might be a good like segue into another thing we wanted to talk about, which was how new adult kind of gets shafted because the publishing industry doesn't quite know what to do with it.
Traditional publishing does not like new adults. It's definitely a category that's accepted among indie publishers. So like my publisher is an indie publisher, so they're fine with it.
And who is your publisher?
The Parliament House Press.
Wonderful.
Generally what will happen is editors will either ask writers to age up characters or age them down. Traditional publishing struggles with new adult partly because of how risk averse and market driven the industry is. It has gotten a little bit better actually since the pandemic, because for a little while editors did not want anything dark. So there was actually a romance boom that started happening during the pandemic. I wish that we could salvage new adult, because I think that it's a category that can have a lot of merit. I mean, especially because there are so many people who are struggling to like fit their work in either like young adult or adult. But
even just having the option of that category, I think would empower a lot of writers, and that like, in between space has so much potential for what people say that they want. They want something that's like fast paced like YA, but they want something that's like a little bit darker or more intense like a regular adult fantasy. Having the option of like, yeah, your main character is 22, you know, they're not making the stupid decisions that a 16-year-old would make, but they definitely don't have the experience of like a 45-year-old.
Publishers they want to meet reader expectations. Nothing will make someone give a book a poor like rating or review faster than having their expectations subverted. I think that people need to engage with books more openly, or just because it doesn't meet your expectations, that doesn't mean it's a bad book and deserves
Ooh, ding ding ding. Like that can be like the thesis of this entire video.
Reader expectations have a lot of power in the publishing industry, and so if the expectation from readers is that a new adult book is going to be spicy, a publisher isn't going to want to subvert that expectation by trying to do something cutting edge. That is true even when we talk about like diverse books. Like one of the reasons that doesn't happen as quickly as some people would like to see is because the vast majority of readers with capital are middle-aged white women. It's kind of a double bind, because in a weird way, like these things are feeding each other. Like publishers do what they expect the market to respond to, but also like they do shape the market also. Bestsellers are not made purely because the book got lucky. Like publishers pour tons of money into a book that they want to make a bestseller.
You have a queer Black author who's writing a book with a non-conventional love interest. Maybe they're not going to pay that author as much, or they're not going to put as much effort into advertising. And then if it doesn't, you know, miraculously get big, then oh man, well I guess people just don't want that. And obviously not going to work. Like I know what's best. And I'm like, but do you? I used to model, and so like that idea of like being a model with tattoos means I'm not going to book a certain percentage of jobs. Does that mean that I'm never going to work ever again? Probably not. I just have to find the niche that I am best set for. And this also kind of goes back to something we were talking about earlier about how just because it doesn't appeal to your 50-something-year-old cis-het white woman persona doesn't necessarily mean that like the youths are not going to like it. Diversity doesn't really end anywhere. You can't be like, all right, we're done with diversity. Like there's always going to be something new. And like that's what's exciting about like how the industry is going to adapt. Okay, well, I think we'll probably wrap that up around here. We've been going for quite a while. Thank you, Alex. AJ Vrana, thank you so much for being here, for chatting. I think there was like some good thoughts were said tonight.
I study literature very seriously and I love literature. And so I really think that like nuanced discussion is the absolute best thing in the world, and we need more of it. So I'm always happy to like discuss complicated topics in fiction.
So if you watching want to get a copy of The Hollow Gods or its sequel, The Echoed Realm, or I suppose any other undisclosed projects that Alex will be going for in the future, AJ Vrana, where can we find your books?
So my books are available at any online retailer like Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you're in Canada, you can get them from Indigo, but you have to order them online. Also, if you want signed copies, they are on my website, thechaoscycle.com, which that's the name of the duology.
And where can people find you on social media?
Oh yes, that's right. I have social media. My Twitter is just AJ Vrana, and my Instagram is a.j.vrana, because apparently someone already took AJ, like how dare they?
How rude.
I also have a TikTok that I'm only on very sporadically, but I do have one.
I would highly recommend anybody follow you, because not only do you get reading updates and like pre-photos of books, you also get wonderful pictures of both your cats.
Yes.
And I think that's worth it. I will leave that and all the links in the description below, so anyone can go and check that out afterwards. So thank you yet again, and thank you for everybody for joining us for a wonderful evening of Live Laugh literary criticism. And I will see you all next week.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed. It was so fun talking with Alex. We basically had this conversation offline so many times, but we're like, you know what? Let's just record it. Let's just hit record and see what happens. And it was great. Once again, her website, all her social medias are linked in the comments below, so you can go check those out. It was very difficult condensing this interview down because we talked for over an hour. So if you like this, let me know, because I have plenty of extra footage to make into a whole other video. Writing and publishing is constantly adapting, and it's taking a little longer than maybe most of us want it to, but it is an industry, and the fact that it's changed so much in just like a decade is honestly pretty impressive. It's nice. I think I'm going to go make some soup and maybe take a couple more sinus medications, because I feel like I'm honking like a goose. You know where to click like the video, you know where to click the subscribe. I hope you guys are all having a nice day wherever you are, and I will see you all next week. Bye!